I'll buy all four sisters for $500. No one separates the mountain man roared at the cruel auction. 75 for the eldest, 50 for the youngest. We split them today. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer's gavel hovered in the damp air. Aline clutched her three trembling sisters, tears cutting through the grime on their faces. They were about to be torn apart forever. Then, a voice like thunder rolled down from the back of the barn, rattling the iron hinges. I'll buy all four sisters for $500 and no one separates them. The crowd parted. Patrick Olmo, a mountain of a man, strode forward. The silence that followed was deafening. The town of Oakhaven was a place where hope went to die, suffocated by the heavy smog of debt and the cruel machinations of the wealthy elite. It wasn't a town of laws, it was a town of ledgers. When a family couldn't pay, their lives were liquidated. Today, the collateral was human. Boris Arino stood on the makeshift wooden stage, his slicked-back hair shining under the harsh, buzzing incandescent bulbs of the auction barn. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief, his eyes scanning the crowd with the predatory gaze of a starved wolf. Behind him, huddled together like frightened sparrows, were the four sisters, Aline Oka, Daria Good, Hege Spinelli, and little Ragnhild Jezik. They shared different last names, a cruel testament to their mother's desperate, tragic marriages to men who all eventually perished in Oakhaven's brutal iron mines. But they shared the same blood, the same profound grief, and the same terrifying fate. Come now, gentlemen. The Oka girl has strong hands, good for the mills. The little one, Ragnhild, she can weave. Boris barked, his voice dripping with greasy charisma. In the front row, Philip Koronkiewicz, a man whose wealth was only matched by his profound arrogance, sneered. He adjusted the lapels of his tailored suit, a stark contrast to the mud-stained boots of the laborers around him. I'll take the eldest for 75, Philip drawled, not even looking at Aline. She looks like she can handle a 12-hour shift at the loom. But I don't want the others, they're dead weight. Next to Philip sat Notburger McDowell, a wealthy socialite whose heart was as cold as the diamonds resting on her collarbone. I'll take the youngest, she offered with a dismissive wave of her hand. $50. I need a new scullery maid, and she looks small enough to fit under the floorboards to clean. Aline Oka, 19 and fiercely protective, pulled 8-year-old Ragnhild behind her legs. Daria, 16, and Hege, 14, clung to Aline's arms. They were sobbing silently, the realization washing over them that this was the end of their family. They were to be scattered to the winds, enslaved by the town's elite under the guise of indentured labor. Going once, Boris yelled, raising his heavy oak gavel. Going twice, Aline squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the crack of the wood that would shatter her world. I'll buy all four sisters for $500, and no one separates them. The voice didn't just speak, it resonated. It was a deep, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The crowd gasped, twisting their necks toward the back of the barn. Stepping out from the shadows of the heavy wooden doors was Patrick Olmo. He was a terrifying sight to the townsfolk, a massive, broad-shouldered mountain man who lived alone in the treacherous high peaks of the Black Ridge Mountains. He wore a heavy, bare fur coat, his face obscured by a thick, dark beard, and his eyes burned with an intensity that made the surrounding men instinctively step back. Boris Arino lowered his gavel, his jaw slack. 500? The sum was astronomical for indentured contracts. It was enough to buy a small farm. Philip Koronkiewicz stood up, his face flushing with indignant rage. See here, you mountain savage, this is a civilized auction. You can't just barge in. Patrick didn't even look at Philip. He walked down the center aisle, his heavy boots thudding against the dirt floor. He reached into his thick coat and pulled out a leather pouch, tossing it onto the stage. It hit the wood with a heavy, unmistakable clink of solid gold coins. Count it, Arino, Patrick growled, his eyes locking onto the auctioneer. And draw up the papers, all four of them, together. Aline looked down at the massive man. She was terrified of him. But as their eyes met for a fraction of a second, she saw something beneath the rugged, intimidating exterior. She didn't see the hunger of Boris, or the cruelty of Philip. She saw a profound, ancient sorrow. Boris, trembling with greed, scrambled to open the pouch, the gleam of the gold reflected in his eyes. Sold, he stammered, slamming the gavel down. Sold to Mr. Olmo. The journey up the mountain was silent and terrifying. The four sisters sat in the back of Patrick's horse-drawn wagon, huddled under a thick woolen blanket. The air grew colder, biting at their cheeks as they left the smog of Oakhaven behind and entered the pristine, freezing wilderness of Blackridge. "Where is he taking us, Aline?" little Ragnhild whispered, her voice trembling. "Is he going to eat us?" "Hush, sweetie. I won't let anything happen to you," Aline lied, her own heart pounding against her ribs. She kept a rusted iron spike she had found in the barn hidden in her sleeve, ready to fight to the death to protect her sisters. Hege, always the most anxious, wrung her hands. "They say he's a monster. They say he talks to the wolves." Daria remained silent, her sharp eyes studying the back of Patrick's head as he drove the draft horses through the snow. When they finally arrived at the cabin, the girls were stunned. It wasn't a dark, dreary cave. It was a massive, beautifully crafted log home, smoke billowing invitingly from a stone chimney. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows onto the snow. Patrick stopped the wagon and stepped down. He didn't order them inside. He simply walked to the back, lowered the tailgate, and took a few steps back, giving them space. "It's cold," was all he said, his voice softer than it had been in the barn. "Go inside. There is soup on the stove." The girls cautiously entered. The interior was spotless, filled with the scent of cedar, roasting meat, and dried herbs. There were comfortable beds, thick furs, and a roaring fire. Patrick came in minutes later, carrying their meager belongings. He pointed to a large adjoining room. "That is your space. My room is on the other side. You lock your door from the inside." Aline stood in front of her sisters, gripping the iron spike in her sleeve. "Why did you buy us, Mr. Olmo? What do you expect us to do?" Patrick stopped. He looked at the trembling girls, his broad shoulders slumping slightly. "I expect you to eat. I expect you to rest. Tomorrow, I expect you to help chop some firewood." He paused, his dark eyes softening. "No one is bought here, Aline. The papers Boris gave me are burning in that hearth." He pointed to the fireplace. Aline gasped as she saw the official town contracts crisping into black ash among the logs. "You're free," Patrick said quietly, "but you can't go back down there. So, you stay here until you are ready." Over the next few weeks, the tension in the cabin slowly thawed. The sisters realized Patrick wasn't a monster. He was a deeply broken man. He spoke little, but his actions were loud. He carved wooden toys for Ragnhild, taught Daria how to track rabbits, and showed Hege how to cultivate winter herb, but their peace was fragile. One evening, a knock echoed at the cabin door. Patrick opened it to find Miłosz Eklund, the town's records clerk. Miłosz was a nervous, morally ambiguous man, caught between his conscience and his gambling debts to the town elite. "Patrick," Miłosz wheezed, shaking the snow from his coat. "You shouldn't have done it. You kicked a hornet's nest." "Speak plain, Miłosz," Patrick demanded. "It wasn't about the labor, Patrick. It was about the land," Miłosz revealed, looking nervously at the sisters who were eavesdropping from the hall. "Their father, the last one to die in the mines. He didn't die poor. He found a massive vein of silver on a forgotten plot of land he owned. The town council hid the deed. Boris and Philip were trying to buy the girls to force them to sign over their inheritance rights when they came of age. Now that you have them, they are coming for you, and they are bringing the law." Down in the soot-stained offices of Oakhaven, a venomous fury was brewing. The air in Philip Koronkiewicz's mahogany-paneled office was thick with expensive cigar smoke, and the sulphurous stench blowing in from the town's mills. Philip paced like a caged tiger, the sound of his Italian leather shoes sharp against the hardwood floor. "You absolute incompetent fool," Philip roared, slamming his fist onto Boris Areno's desk, rattling a crystal decanter of whiskey. "You let a savage, a hermit in a bear coat, walk away with millions of dollars in silver rights for $500, right under my nose." Boris cowered slightly in his armchair, though his own eyes remained cold and calculating. "We couldn't have stopped him, Philip. You saw the size of him. He paid in pure gold. The auction was entirely legal in front of 300 witnesses." "I don't care about the letter of the law," spat Notburger McDowell from the corner of the room. She was elegantly draped over a velvet settee, calmly smoking a long, silver-tipped cigarette. "We own this town. We own the ledgers, the judges, and the press. We just need to nullify the sale. We will simply claim the girls were violently abducted from the auction, or that the mountain man's gold was stolen from the town vault. We need muscle, not just paperwork," Philip declared, his face flushed purple with rage. He turned his attention to the heavy oak doors. "Alan, Get in here. Sheriff Alan Ollison stepped from the shadows of the hallway. He was a cruel, corrupt man who wore his tin badge merely as a license to extort the weak and break the defiant. A long, ugly scar ran down his cheek, twisting his perpetual smile into a grimace. A mountain man? Alan scoffed, pulling a revolver from his holster and casually checking the cylinder. Easy work. We declare him a kidnapper and a thief. We go up there. We burn his cabin to the ash. We drag the girls back down by their hair, and we split the silver. But my cut just went up to 30%, Philip. Hazardous duty pay. Philip ground his teeth but nodded sharply. Fine, just get it done. I want those deeds signed in blood if necessary. Up on the mountain, the atmosphere inside the cozy cabin had radically changed. The revelation of their father's hidden wealth and the impending threat hung heavy over the timbered walls. The fire no longer felt like a comfort. It felt like a beacon drawing predators in the dark. Aline, feeling the crushing weight of her role as the family's protector, walked out onto the back porch. Patrick was there, his massive arms rhythmically pushing a heavy iron axe against a spinning grindstone. The harsh screech of metal and the shower of orange sparks punctuated the freezing silence of the mountain. We should leave, Patrick, Aline said, her voice steady but tightly laced with fear. She wrapped her shawl tighter against the biting wind. If they are coming for us, we will bring violence to your home. You've done enough for us, more than anyone ever has. Patrick stopped grinding. He leaned heavily on the handle of the axe, his broad back to her. He looked out at the falling snow, his jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from granite. Years ago, he began, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying easily over the wind. I had a wife, Alara, and a daughter, Lily. She was exactly Ragnhild's age. Same bright eyes. Aline froze. The girls had often whispered about the empty, untouched room at the back of the cabin, the one with the small, dust-covered wooden rocking horse. I caught the black lung, Patrick continued, the pain in his voice raw and decades deep. Couldn't work the iron mines anymore. We fell into crippling debt. Boris and Philip, they called in the markers. They took my Alara and my Lily to work off the debt in the textile mills down in the valley. He turned around slowly. The agonizing grief etched into the lines of his face made Aline's breath catch in her throat. The conditions were brutal. A grease fire broke out on the 3rd floor. The foreman. They had padlocked the fire escapes from the outside to prevent the workers from stealing fabric. Patrick's massive hands trembled, gripping the axe handle until his knuckles turned white. I ran down the mountain. I clawed at those iron doors with my bare hands while the building burned. I couldn't save them. I came back to this mountain to die in the cold, but the cold wouldn't take me. He stepped toward her, towering over the porch, yet looking incredibly vulnerable. I didn't save them, but I swear to you by every star in that sky, Aline Oka, no one is taking you and your sisters off this mountain against your will. Let the wolves come. I know how to hold the mountain. The heavy oak door creaked open. Daria, who had been listening from the kitchen, stepped out onto the porch. Her usually quiet demeanor was gone, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. In her hand, she held a long, wicked-looking skinning knife from Patrick's table. We aren't running either, the 16-year-old said fiercely, standing shoulder to shoulder with her older sister. If this is our father's land, if he died for it, we fight for it. Teach us, Patrick. Show us where to stand. For the first time since the girls had met him, the heavy sorrow in Patrick Olmo's eyes shifted. A small, grim smile of deep respect touched his lips. Then grab your heavy coats, he growled. We have work to do. By mid-afternoon, the pressure in Oakhaven had reached a boiling point. Sheriff Alan O'Lesson gathered a heavily armed posse of 20 men in the town square. They were a mix of corrupt deputies and hired thugs from the saloons, armed to the teeth with repeating rifles, shotguns, and kerosene torches. They passed around flasks of cheap whiskey to ward off the biting cold, their breath pluming in the freezing air like exhaust from the mills. Before they departed, Notburger McDowell summoned Miosh Eklund into a dark alley beside the courthouse. Miosh, Notburger purred smoothly, handing him a thick stack of forged legal documents bearing fake municipal seals. These state that Patrick Olmo's gold was violently stolen from the town bank, and that he has been holding the Oka girls at gunpoint. You will ride with the sheriff. When they bring the bodies down, you will present these to the regional magistrate and testify to their authenticity. Miosh's hands trembled so violently he nearly dropped the papers. Bodies? Mrs. McDowell, you said you just wanted the girls returned safely. Don't be deliberately naive. Mioche, Philip sneered, stepping out from the shadows of the alley, tapping a silver-headed cane against the cobblestones. The savage has to die. If there's a trial, he speaks. If he speaks, the governor's marshals might start looking into our ledgers. If you don't play your part exactly as scripted, I will call in your gambling debts tonight. Your wife and children will be on Boris's auction block by tomorrow morning. Mioche swallowed hard, his stomach churning with sickening self-loathing. He tucked the forged papers into his coat. He rode up the mountain near the back of Alan's posse, the cold biting into his soul far more than his flesh. The journey up Black Ridge was treacherous. The wind howled through the pines, and the snowdrifts were waist-deep in places. A horse slipped on a patch of black ice, sending its rider tumbling down a steep embankment with a sharp cry. The mountain was already rejecting them. As the heavily armed men neared the ridge overlooking Patrick's cabin, Alan held up a gloved fist, ordering them to halt. "We wait till dusk," Alan whispered, his breath a white cloud. "We surround the perimeter. On my whistle, we fire into the windows. If the giant comes out, put him down. Grab the girls." Mioche, consumed by a suffocating guilt, realized he was about to be an accessory to the murder of the only decent man he knew, and the enslavement of 4 innocent girls. Under the pretext of scouting the western flank, he slipped away from the group. Once out of sight, he ran. He plunged through the deep snow, his lungs burning like fire, tree branches whipping his face and tearing his clothes. He expected to find a fortified bunker at the end of his run, terrified hostages cowering under the boot of a madman. Instead, he burst into the clearing and froze. Near the woodpile, Hager and Ragnhild were building a massive snow fort, their genuine, breathless laughter echoing in the crisp air. On the porch, Aline and Daria were practicing drawing hunting bows under Patrick's calm, patient instruction. It wasn't a hostage situation. It was a picture of a healing family. The sight shattered Mioche. He remembered the Oak Haven he used to love as a boy, long before the ledgers and the greed consumed it. He stumbled out of the tree line, hands raised high in the air, gasping for breath. "Patrick! Aline! Run!" Patrick reacted with terrifying speed. He pushed the girls behind him and instantly drew a heavy Winchester rifle from a scabbard on the porch, aiming it squarely at Mioche's chest. The hammer clicked back with a sharp, metallic snap. Aline shoved the barrel of the rifle downward. "Wait! Don't shoot! It's the clerk!" Mioche collapsed to his knees in the snow, gasping for air, hot tears freezing on his cheeks. "They are here," he wheezed. "Alan Olesen, 20 men, repeaters and torches. They have forged papers. They are going to kill you, Patrick, and enslave the girls to steal the silver rights. I was supposed to help them legalize the murder, but I can't. I can't let it happen." Patrick stared down the barrel of his lowered rifle at the trembling clerk. A part of him wanted to shoot the man for his initial cowardice, but Patrick knew the crushing, paralyzing weight of Oak Haven's fear better than anyone. He lowered the gun fully, stepped off the porch, and hauled Mioche to his feet by the lapels of his coat. "You did the right thing today, Mioche," Patrick said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "How much time do we have?" "Less than half an hour," Mioche panicked, looking frantically at the tree line. "Maybe less. They have overwhelming firepower. You can't fight 20 armed men." "I don't have to," Patrick said, turning his gaze toward the dense, treacherous woods surrounding the cabin. "They are city men. They don't know this mountain, and they have no idea who they are hunting." He spun toward the girls, his demeanor entirely shifted to a military commander. "Aline, take Ragnhild and Hege to the root cellar beneath the floorboards. Lock the heavy iron grate from the inside. Do not make a sound until I come for you." "No," Aline said, her voice shaking but her feet planted firmly on the floorboards. "Daria knows the woods now. I know how to use the rifle. We are not hiding in the dark while you die for us." Patrick looked at the fierce, unyielding determination in the young women's eyes. They had been victims their entire lives. Today, they were drawing a line in the snow. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. "Then we hunt. Move." Dusk fell over the Black Ridge Mountains like a heavy, suffocating velvet shroud. Sheriff Alan Olesen led his men forward, kerosene torches flickering to life, completely ignorant of the fact that the darkness was not their cover, but their executioner. "Spread out! Surround the cabin!" Alan barked, arrogance radiating from his posture as he gripped his shotgun. If the giant so much as shows his face at a window, fill it with lead, As the first deputies confidently stepped off the trail and into the dense pine tree line, the mountain fought back. Snap. A tripwire, carefully hidden beneath the fresh snow by Patrick hours earlier, caught a deputy's boot. It triggered a massive deadfall trap. A thick, spiked log swung down from the high canopy with the force of a battering ram, sweeping 3 men off their feet and sending them screaming violently down the steep, rocky ravine. Panic instantly erupted in the posse. "Ambush! In the trees! Open fire!" Alan yelled, shooting blindly into the dark woods. Muzzle flashes strobed through the forest. Bullets chewed through the bark of the ancient pines. But Patrick was a ghost. He moved through the snow in his heavy furs with zero sound, blending perfectly with the shadows. He didn't use a gun to give away his position. He used the environment. He dropped silently from a low branch directly behind 2 thugs reloading their rifles, knocking their heads together with terrifying, bone-jarring force before vanishing back into the canopy like smoke. Meanwhile, 100 yards away on a rocky outcropping, Daria and Aline lay flat on their stomachs, camouflaged entirely in white winter rabbit furs. Daria's breathing was slow and steady. She drew back the string of her hunting bow. 2 o'clock. By the blasted oak, Aline whispered, acting as her spotter. Thwack. Daria released the string. An arrow hissed through the air, pinning a deputy's heavy coat to the trunk of the oak tree. The man shrieked, dropping his rifle in terror. Thwack. Another arrow shattered the glass of the lantern Alan was holding, plunging the center of the posse into terrifying, disorienting darkness. "Where are they coming from?" a thug screamed, abandoning his post and running blindly back down the trail, terrified of the unseen phantoms picking them apart. Philip Koronkiewicz, who had foolishly insisted on coming to ensure his property was secured and the job done right, was cowering behind a large, snow-covered boulder. He was shivering uncontrollably, using a terrified young deputy as a human shield. "Oh, listen, you idiot. Do something. Kill him," Philip shrieked, his pristine suit covered in mud and snow. Suddenly, the deputy in front of Philip was yanked backward into the darkness by an unseen force. Philip gasped, scrambling backward on his hands and knees. A massive hand reached over the boulder, grabbed Philip by the scruff of his expensive cashmere coat, and hauled him effortlessly into the air like a rag doll. Patrick stepped into the pale moonlight, holding the billionaire suspended with one arm, his other hand gripping a heavy hunting knife. "Tell your men to drop their weapons, Philip." Patrick's voice boomed, echoing violently off the canyon walls. It didn't sound like a man. It sounded like the mountain itself was speaking. Alan Olesen, seeing his wealthy paymaster held hostage, leveled his shotgun at Patrick's chest. He spat in the snow. "I don't give a damn about him, mountain man. I care about the silver rights. With him dead, I can take it all." Alan's finger tightened on the trigger. Before he could fire, a deafening crack echoed from the porch of the cabin. Alan dropped his shotgun, screaming in sheer agony as he clutched his shattered right shoulder, falling to his knees in the blood-stained snow. Miłosz Eklund stepped out from the shadows of the porch, an old, smoking hunting rifle trembling violently in his hands. The clerk, who had spent his entire life bowing to cruel men, had finally found his courage. With their sheriff bleeding out in the snow, their employer held hostage by a giant, and unseen arrows still raining from the darkness, the remaining thugs broke entirely. They dropped their rifles, abandoned their torches, and fled down the mountain in absolute, whimpering terror. Patrick threw Philip to the ground. The arrogant billionaire landed face first in the snow, sobbing hysterically and begging for his life. Patrick ignored him. He walked slowly over to Alan, who was writhing in pain. He didn't kill him. He reached into Alan's coat and forcefully ripped away his official sheriff's badge, then pulled out the forged documents Notberger had prepared. Patrick looked down at the broken men. "The auction," he said coldly, "is over." The aftermath was swift and devastating for the elite of Oakhaven. Patrick, accompanied by the 4 sisters and a reformed Miłosz, marched the captured Alan and Philip down the mountain the next morning. They bypassed the corrupt town council and went straight to the state governor's marshal in the neighboring city. Miłosz provided the absolute proof. He handed over the town's real, hidden ledgers, documents he had secretly copied for years, exposing decades of extortion, illegal slavery masquerading as debt, and the theft of the Oka family's silver mine. The karma hit like a freight train. Boris Areno was arrested at his auction podium, crying and begging for mercy, as federal marshals dragged him away. Notburger McDowell's assets were entirely frozen, and she was sentenced to the very same hard labor penitentiary she had sent so many innocent people to. Philip Koronkiewicz and Alan Olesen faced the harshest sentences. Philip lost every penny of his fortune, his empire crumbling overnight. The absolute irony was not lost on the town. The men who treated humans as property were now stripped of everything, facing decades in federal prison. As for the sisters, the state reinstated their father's land deed to them. Overnight, Aline, Daria, Hege, and Ragnhild became the wealthiest family in the region. The town of Oak Haven expected them to take over the mansions, to become the new elite. Instead, they liquidated the town's debts. Alinoka stood on the very stage where she was almost sold, and burned the town's debt ledgers in a massive bonfire, freeing hundreds of families. A month later, a sleek carriage arrived at the foot of the Blackridge Mountains. The four sisters stepped out, dressed in warm, high-quality winter clothes, not rags. They looked up at the snowy peak. "Are you sure about this, Aline?" Miłosz asked. He had been appointed the new, honest town mayor, largely funded by the sisters' silver. "You could live anywhere in the world now. Paris, New York." Aline looked at Daria, Hege, and Ragnhild. They were smiling. "We already have a home, Miłosz." They hiked up the trail, not as captives, but as conquerors. When they reached the clearing, the cabin was warm, smoke rising from the chimney. Patrick Olmo was outside, chopping wood. He paused, seeing them approach. He thought they had left for good to claim their riches. Little Ragnhild broke into a run, tackling Patrick's massive legs in a hug. Patrick dropped the axe, his large hands gently resting on her head. "We brought groceries," Aline said, smiling as tears of joy pricked her eyes. "And we have a lot of firewood to chop." Patrick looked at the four young women who had brought life back to his dead heart. A genuine, bright smile finally broke across the mountain man's face. "Then you better get inside. Soup's on the stove. No money, no cruelty, and no distance could ever separate them again." They weren't just sisters anymore, and he wasn't just a mountain man. They were a family, forged in the coldest snows, bound by the warmest love. Patrick's immense courage and the sisters' unbreakable bond prove that no amount of money or corruption can defeat the power of genuine love and family. The karma that struck Philip, Boris, and Notburger is a powerful reminder to us all. How we treat the vulnerable ultimately dictates our own fate. Arrogance and cruelty always build their own cages. In our real lives, we may not face dramatic auctions or mountain sieges, but we do face choices every day. Do we use our power to uplift others, or to exploit them? Let Patrick's story inspire you to be a protector, to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, and to realize that true wealth isn't measured in silver, but in the people we hold dear. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with your friends to spread the message of hope and justice, and don't forget to subscribe for more epic, emotional tales. Let us know in the comments what you would have done in Patrick's shoes.